The humid air of the kitchen clung to my skin like a second, unwanted layer, thick with the scent of simmering black beans and frying garlic. It was a Sunday, and in our family, Sunday meant feijoada. The rhythmic, comforting clatter of my mother's wooden spoon against the heavy-bottomed pot was the heartbeat of this house, a sound I'd known since before I could form memories. I was setting the long oak table, the cool, smooth grain of the wood familiar under my fingertips, placing each heavy ceramic plate with a soft thud. My father was in his armchair, the low murmur of a football game on the television a constant drone, and the occasional crackle of his newspaper as he turned a page. It was a portrait of normalcy, a scene so deeply etched into my life I could have painted it with my eyes closed. My brother, Carlos, walked in, the screen door slapping shut behind him with a familiar wooden crack. He brought in the smell of cut grass and summer heat. "Smells good, Ma," he said, his voice a little too bright, a little too forced. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm, almost tense. "How's the prodigal daughter today?" "I live here, Carlos," I said, shrugging his hand away with a small smile. "That makes me the opposite of prodigal." "Just checking in," he replied, his eyes darting towards our mother for a fraction of a second. A tiny, cold pinprick of unease touched the base of my spine. I dismissed it. It was just Carlos, always a little awkward, a little too eager. The meal began as these meals always did. Platters of food were passed, steam rising in fragrant waves. The rich, smoky taste of the feijoada, the sharp bite of the collard greens, the fluffy farofa crunching between my teeth. We talked about work, about Dad's garden, about the neighbors. Then, my mother, her voice deceptively gentle, like warm milk, said, "Lena, your father and I, and Carlos, we're a little worried about you." I paused, a piece of orange halfway to my lips. The sweet, citrus scent suddenly seemed cloying. "Worried? About what?" "You've been so distant," my father added, not meeting my eyes, instead focusing on meticulously slicing a piece of sausage. The knife scraped against the plate with a high-pitched whine that set my teeth on edge. "Staying up all hours in your studio. Talking to yourself." "My studio is where I work," I said, my own voice tightening. "I'm a painter. I talk to my canvases. It's called thinking out loud." "It's more than that, Lena." Carlos leaned forward, his forearms on the table, his plate pushed aside. The light from the wrought iron chandelier above cast deep shadows under his eyes. "We found the blog. The one where you write all that stuff. About the family. About us." A cold wave washed over me, dousing the warmth from the food. My blog was my secret garden, a locked digital diary where I poured out my frustrations, my fears, my fragmented memories of a childhood that sometimes felt like it belonged to someone else. "That's private," I whispered, my throat dry. "How did you?" "Your mother was on your laptop, checking her email," my father said, his tone final, brooking no argument. "It was an accident." The lie was so flimsy, so transparent, it felt like an insult. My mother never used my laptop. The air in the room grew heavy, pressing down on me. The familiar sense of garlic and cumin now smelled of betrayal. "It's my private thoughts," I repeated, stronger this time. "It's not a crime to have private thoughts." "They're not just thoughts, Lena," my mother said, her voice trembling with a practiced, heartbreaking sadness. "You write about things that never happened. You say we hurt you. That we kept things from you. It's like you're living in a different reality." Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in my chest. "I write about feelings. About gaps. I have memories, little pieces, a trip to the beach, a storm, someone crying. I'm just trying to make sense of it all." "You see?" Carlos said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, grave tone. "Fragments. Gaps. That's what we're talking about. It's not healthy. We think you need help. Real help. I don't need help. I need you to respect my privacy." I pushed my chair back, the legs screeching against the terracotta tile floor. The sound was a scream in the stifling room. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm fine. I am perfectly fine." That's when I saw them. Two figures, a man and a woman, appearing in the doorway from the living room. They were dressed in plain, dark clothes. They looked out of place, their faces neutral, their posture rigid. The room seemed to tilt. The sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant TV, faded into a high-pitched ring in my ears. "Lena," my father said, his voice now cold and distant, "these people are here to help you. We've arranged for you to go to a facility. The Oak Haven Center. It's for your own good." "No." The word was a breath, a plea. "No, you can't." "We can, honey," my mother said, and a single tear traced a path through her powder. It looked so real, so perfectly timed. "We have a temporary guardianship order." The doctor agreed. "You're a danger to yourself." "A danger? How?" "By writing in a blog." I was backing away, my hands trembling. The two strangers stepped forward. The man had kind eyes, but they were empty of any real emotion. Dad. Carlos. Please. Carlos looked down at his plate. My father stared at me, his jaw set, his eyes like flint. It's for the best, Lena. Go with them. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The woman approached me, her movements slow and deliberate, as if calming a spooked animal. Lena, my name is Sarah. We're just going to take a little ride, okay? Everything is going to be okay. I felt a scream building in my throat, but when it came out, it was a strangled, helpless sound. I turned to run, to my room, to anywhere, but the man was faster. His grip on my arm was firm, professional, not cruel but utterly inescapable. I thrashed, sobbing, my vision blurring with tears. I caught a final glimpse of my family. My mother was weeping into her hands. My father's face was a stony mask. Carlos just looked, relieved. The last thing I felt was a sharp prick in my arm. The world, already spinning, dissolved into a thick, syrupy blackness. The scent of feijoada was the last thing I remembered, a cruel, comforting memory twisted into a nightmare. Continua a história. I woke to the sterile, suffocating smell of antiseptic and bleach. It was a cold, sharp odor that clawed at the back of my throat, erasing any lingering trace of garlic and home. The surface beneath me was stiff, the sheets rough and thin. A dim, gray light filtered through a small, wire-reinforced window, illuminating a room that was little more than a cell. Pale green walls, a scuffed linoleum floor, a single, bolted-down chair. The air was still and dead, mechanically cooled to a constant, skin-prickling chill. My head felt stuffed with cotton, my limbs heavy and uncoordinated. I tried to sit up, a wave of nausea rolling through me. The door opened with a soft, pneumatic hiss, and a woman in purple scrubs entered. She was broad-shouldered, with a placid, unreadable face. Good morning, Lena. I'm Nurse Gale. How are you feeling? Where am I? My voice was a raspy croak. You're at Oakhaven Center. You're safe here. She placed a small paper cup of water and 2 pills on the bedside table. This will help with the dizziness. I don't want them. I pushed the cup away, my hand shaking. The water sloshed onto the table, a dark, spreading stain. It's part of your treatment plan, Lena. You need to take them. Her voice was calm, implacable. It wasn't a request. A treatment plan. The words echoed in the hollow space of my mind. This was real. They had really done it. My family. My own flesh and blood. A sob hitched in my chest, but I choked it back. I would not give them the satisfaction, not even the unseen them of this place. The days blurred into a monotonous, soul-crushing routine. The days were a colorless parade of group therapy sessions where patients mumbled half-truths through medicated hazes, of one-on-one sessions with Dr. Evans, a man with a kind smile that never reached his eyes and a notepad that was his true focus. He asked gentle, probing questions about my childhood, my blog, my paranoia about my family. They were so worried about you, Lena, he'd say, his pen scratching against the paper. The sound was like insects skittering inside my skull. They love you very much. This intervention, as difficult as it was, came from a place of love. Love? I spat the word out. They drugged me and dragged me out of my home. They violated my trust. They read my private thoughts and called them lies. Perceptions can be tricky things, he replied, his tone infuriatingly reasonable. Especially when we're under stress. The mind can create narratives to protect itself. I spent my free hours in the common room, a vast, cheerless space with bolted-down, vinyl-covered furniture and a television permanently tuned to insipid game shows. The air smelled of stale coffee and despair. I watched the other patients, their movements slowed by medication, their eyes dull. Was that how they saw me? Was I just another broken thing to be medicated into compliance? My only solace was the art room. It was a bleak imitation of my sun-drenched studio at home, stocked with cheap, safety-approved supplies, blunt children's scissors, waxy crayons, watery poster paints. But it was a space to create, to scream without making a sound. I painted dark, swirling images of a kitchen table that became a monstrous mouth, of faces melting into one another, of a single, tearful eye watching from a stormy sky. The staff called it cathartic. I called it the truth. Weeks turned into a month. The sharp edges of my anger began to dull, sanded down by the relentless routine and the constant, low-grade sedation of the pills I was forced to swallow. The fight in me was dying, and that terrified me more than anything. The thought of accepting their version of reality, of believing I was the sick, delusional one, felt like a spiritual death. One afternoon, during a rare moment of quiet in the common room, an older patient named Mr. Henderson shuffled over to my usual chair by the window. He had a kind, wrinkled face and eyes that sometimes held a startling clarity amidst the haze. "Don't let them bake your brain, girl," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle. He smelled of mint and old skin. They bake your brain with those pills, and you forget what you're fighting for. You forget the questions. What questions? I asked, my own voice barely a whisper. The only one that matters, he said, tapping a gnarled finger to his temple. Why? You ask yourself why. Why here? Why now? Why this way? He looked around furtively. They don't put you in a place like this for writing sad poems. There's always a key. A reason. Find the key. He shuffled away before I could respond, leaving me with a heart suddenly pounding against my ribs. Mr. Henderson was right. My family story, the one they sold to Dr. Evans, was full of holes. A blog? Distant behavior? It was flimsy. There had to be a key. A real reason they needed me silenced, out of the way, declared incompetent. The thought was a spark in the darkness. That night, lying on my thin mattress, listening to the muffled cries of another patient down the hall, I made a decision. I would play their game. I would be the model patient. I would swallow their pills, nod in therapy, paint happy, bland pictures of flowers and sunsets. I would lull them into a false sense of security. And I would find a way to get a message out. I had to get to a phone. I had to talk to someone outside this sterile nightmare. My chance came 2 weeks later. A plumbing issue in the main office caused a minor flood, and the staff was distracted, moving files and computers. In the chaos, I saw it. The landline phone on the reception desk was unattended, its cord a slender, black lifeline. My mouth went dry. This was it. I had maybe a minute, 2 at most. I had practiced this moment in my head 100 times. I wouldn't call a friend, they'd believe my family story. I needed a professional. Someone bound by law, not by sentiment. I slipped away from the art therapy group, my pulse a frantic drumbeat in my ears. The hallway was empty. I moved quickly, my soft-soled shoes making no sound on the linoleum. I reached the desk, my hand trembling as I picked up the heavy receiver. The dial tone was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I dialed 0, my breath held tight in my chest. Operator, a crisp, female voice answered. Collect call, I whispered, my voice tight with fear. To the law offices of Miller and Associates. It was the only law firm I could remember, their jingle from a late-night TV ad stuck in my head. A pause, then a ring. Another. Each one an eternity. Miller and Associates, a young, bored voice answered. I have a collect call from Alina Ribeiro, do you accept the charges? A beat of silence. I prayed. Sure. Put her through. The connection clicked. I had maybe 30 seconds. My name is Lina Ribeiro, I rushed out, the words tumbling over each other. My family had me committed against my will at the Oakhaven Center. I am being held here illegally. I need a lawyer. I need someone to file a writ of habeas corpus. Please, you have to help me. Ma'am, I'm just an intern. I can't. Get this message to someone who can. Please. My family is lying. There's a reason they're doing this, and I need to find out what it is before it's too late. I heard footsteps approaching down the hall. I have to go. Please. Remember my name. Lina Ribeiro. I slammed the receiver down just as Nurse Gail rounded the corner. Her eyes narrowed. Lina? What are you doing out of art therapy? I felt sick, I said, forcing a cough, placing a hand on my stomach. I was coming to find you. She studied me for a long moment, her gaze searching. I kept my face a mask of nauseated weakness. Finally, she nodded. Let's get you back to your room. I'll have the doctor check on you. As I walked back to my cell, my heart still racing, a fragile, desperate hope flickered inside me. I had thrown a bottle into a vast, dark ocean. I could only pray that someone would find it. Continua a história. The days after the phone call were an exercise in agonizing tension. Every time a staff member looked at me, I was convinced they knew. Every summons to the office sent a jolt of pure terror through my system. I expected punishment, isolation, an increase in my medication. But nothing happened. The routine continued, unchanging and oppressive. The intern must have dismissed my call as the ramblings of a mental patient. My hope began to curdle into a familiar, thick despair. Then, one overcast Tuesday during a group session where a man named David was monotonously describing his fear of pigeons, the door opened. Dr. Evans stood there, his expression unreadable. Lina? Could you come with me, please? This was it. They had found out. My legs felt like water as I followed him down the familiar, antiseptic-smelling hallway. But he didn't lead me to his office or to the isolation room. He led me to a small, sterile visiting room I hadn't seen before. Sitting at a plain metal table was a woman I had never seen. She was in her late 40s, perhaps, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses and a severe black suit that seemed out of place in the drabness of Oakhaven. A leather briefcase rested on the floor beside her. She smelled faintly of coffee and ambition. Lina, this is Ms. Eleanor Vance, Dr. Evans said, his voice carefully neutral. She's an attorney. She's here to speak with you. My breath caught in my throat. The bottle had been found. Dr. Evans left us, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. The room was silent save for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Eleanor Vance didn't smile. She assessed me with a cool, professional gaze. Your phone call reached a young man at my firm who, thankfully, has a healthy sense of paranoia and a good memory. He passed your message to me. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. I've reviewed the petition for temporary guardianship filed by your family. It's compelling, on the surface. Testimony from your parents and brother about erratic behavior, insomnia, paranoia, and a history of fabricated memories. They submitted printouts from your blog as evidence. They had no right, I whispered, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. Rights are often the first casualty in these situations, she said flatly. The standard of proof for an emergency guardianship is unfortunately low, especially when supported by a treating physician's affidavit. A Dr. Albright, I believe? I nodded. Our family doctor. A man who had known me since I was a child. Another betrayal. Lena, Eleanor's voice softened a fraction. I need you to be completely honest with me. Why do you believe your family did this? I told her everything. Not the sanitized version I gave Dr. Evans, but the raw, unfiltered truth. The feeling that something in our family history was a lie. The vague, persistent memories from when I was very young, maybe 5 or 6, a loud argument, a long car ride in the rain, a woman who wasn't my mother singing to me. The way certain topics were off limits, the way a curtain would fall over my parents' eyes if I asked about the past. My blog was my attempt to piece it together, to give voice to the ghost of a little girl who felt like a stranger in her own life. I'm not delusional, I finished, my voice trembling with the effort of containing my emotion. I know my memories are fragmented. But they're not false. And my family's reaction, this. I gestured around the sterile room. This isn't about a blog. This is about a secret. A big one. They're not trying to help me. They're trying to silence me. Eleanor Vance watched me, her pen still. She didn't write anything down for a long moment. The court granted a 6-month guardianship, renewable. Your family has control of your finances, your assets, your medical decisions. To overturn it, we need to prove you are not a danger to yourself or others. More than that, to prevent them from simply renewing it in 6 months, we need to cast significant doubt on their motives. How do we do that? We request a formal hearing. We subpoena records. We cross-examine your family. We find the crack in their story and we pry it open. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. But it's a risk, Lena. A very public, very painful risk. The burden of proof will shift to us. The court will be predisposed to believe your family. Are you prepared for that? To sit in a room and have your parents and your brother call you a liar to your face? The thought made me physically ill. But the thought of staying here, of my life being erased pill by pill, was worse. Yes, I said, and the word felt like a vow. I'm prepared. Good. She snapped her briefcase shut. Then I'll see you in court. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Eleanor visited regularly, her presence a beacon of hard, cold reality in the soft, blurry world of Oak Haven. We went over every detail of my life, every blog post, every childhood memory. She was a sculptor, chipping away at the narrative my family had built, looking for the true shape beneath. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. I was given a set of my own clothes to wear, a simple, navy blue dress that felt foreign on my skin. The ride to the courthouse was a blur of passing traffic and my own thundering heartbeat. The courthouse itself was a monument of imposing stone and echoing hallways, smelling of old wood, floor polish, and slow, grinding justice. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, but no less intimidating. The judge, an older woman with a stern face and silver hair, sat high above us. My family was already there, on the other side of the aisle. My mother in a conservative black dress, her hands clutching a pearl necklace. My father, stern and unreadable in his best suit. Carlos, avoiding my gaze, looking pale and uncomfortable. Seeing them there, my own flesh and blood, arrayed against me like enemies, was a pain so acute it was almost physical. Their attorney, a smooth-faced man named Mr. Davies, presented their case. He spoke of their heartbreaking decision, their love and concern, my downward spiral. He painted a picture of a daughter lost to conspiracy theories and baseless accusations against the very people who loved her most. He read excerpts from my blog, my private, poetic anguish made to sound like the ravings of a madwoman. Then, it was Eleanor's turn. She stood, calm and poised. Your Honor, if we are to believe the petitioners, my client is a danger to herself because she asks questions about her own childhood. She is deemed unstable because she has a creative outlet for her feelings. This is not a case about mental illness. It is a case about control. She began her cross-examination with my father. She was polite, precise, a surgeon with words. Mr. Ribeiro, you stated that your daughter's erratic behavior began approximately 8 months ago, is that correct? Yes, my father said, his voice gruff. And what specifically prompted you to seek a guardianship at this particular time? Was there an incident? A threat? We felt it was getting worse. She was isolating herself. But no specific, dangerous incident? No suicide attempt? No threats of violence? No, but, thank you. She moved on. You also control a family trust, do you not? One that Lena is set to inherit a significant portion of on her 30th birthday, which is in 5 months. My father's jaw tightened. That has nothing to do with this. Doesn't it? Eleanor let the question hang in the air for a moment before turning to my mother. Mrs. Ribeiro, you testified that Lena has always had a vivid imagination. Can you give the court an example from her childhood? My mother fluttered her hands nervously. Oh, she would make up stories. About places she'd been, people she'd met. What kind of places? What kind of people? Just silly things. She once insisted we had taken a trip to a lighthouse in Maine. We never have. I felt a jolt. The lighthouse. I had a memory, clear as day, of the salty air, the screech of gulls, the dizzying height, and the feeling of being held in strong arms that were not my father's. Eleanor didn't react. She saved her most intense scrutiny for Carlos. She approached him slowly, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Mr. Ribeiro, you are the one who discovered the blog, is that correct? Yes, Carlos said, his voice tight. And how, precisely, did you come across this private, password-protected journal? Carlos shifted in his seat. I guessed the password. It was something obvious. Her childhood dog's name. A dog she had when she was 6 years old. A dog that died over 20 years ago. That's quite a guess. Eleanor's tone was dry. Or did you have help accessing it? I told you, I guessed it. Let's talk about your financial situation, Carlos. The court has been provided with records showing that you have taken out several significant loans against your future inheritance from the same family trust. Loans that are coming due, coincidentally, around the time of Lena's 30th birthday. Isn't it true that if Lena were declared incompetent, your parents, as her guardians, could block her from accessing her share, and you would be in a position to renegotiate the terms of your debt, or even have it forgiven entirely? Objection. Mr. Davies was on his feet. Relevance? This is a guardianship hearing, not a probate case. The judge overruled him. I'll allow it. The witness will answer the question. Carlos's face had gone ashen. He looked at our parents, a silent plea for help. My mother had gone pale. My father was staring straight ahead, his face a rigid mask. The crack that Eleanor had been searching for was now a chasm, visible for everyone in the room to see. The motive was no longer a vague suspicion, it was taking shape, ugly and financial, right there in the open. But it wasn't the final piece. It wasn't the key Mr. Henderson had told me to find. Money was a motive, but it didn't explain the depth of the secret, the fear in my mother's eyes when I asked about the past. Eleanor seemed to sense it too. She turned back to my mother, her voice dropping, becoming almost gentle, which was in itself a weapon. Mrs. Ribeiro, this story about the lighthouse. You are certain you never took a family trip to Maine when Lena was a child? Never, my mother whispered, her knuckles white around her pearls. Then perhaps you can explain this. Eleanor walked to her table and pulled a large, faded photograph from a folder. She approached the bench and handed it to the judge, then gave a copy to my mother. This was entered into evidence from the family archives. It shows a little girl, who is unmistakably Lena at around age 5, standing on the rocks below the Portland Headlight in Maine. The date stamped on the back is June 18, 1994. You are standing right beside her. The air was sucked from the room. My mother stared at the photograph as if it were a ghost. Her hand flew to her mouth, and a strangled, helpless sound escaped her lips. Her composure, the carefully constructed facade of the worried mother, shattered into a million pieces. She began to cry, deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. My father stood up. That's enough. Leave her alone. But it was too late. The dam had broken. The judge, her expression grim, called for a recess. As the bailiff led me and Eleanor out of the courtroom, I looked back at my family. My father was holding my sobbing mother. Carlos had his head in his hands. They were not the powerful, unified front they had presented just an hour before. They were a circle of people whose lives had just collapsed in on them. We waited in a small, windowless conference room. I was shaking, my mind reeling. The lighthouse was real. My memory was real. They had lied about something so small, so seemingly insignificant. What else had they lied about? After what felt like an eternity, the door opened. It was my father. Alone. He looked old, defeated. The stern authority was gone from his face, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. He looked at Eleanor, then at me. Can we talk? Alone? Eleanor looked at me, a question in her eyes. I nodded slowly. She left the room, closing the door softly behind her. The silence between my father and me was a vast, cold ocean. He sank into a chair opposite me, the leather sighing under his weight. The lighthouse, he began, his voice a hollow echo. It was a trip we took with someone else. Who? My voice was barely a whisper. He didn't answer directly. He just looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not a tyrant or a betrayer, but a man haunted. Lena, everything we did to protect you. Protect me from what? The truth? From her, he said, and the word was filled with a lifetime of pain. And in that moment, staring into my father's tormented eyes, I knew. I knew the key that Mr. Henderson had told me to find. The key wasn't about money, not really. It was about a person. A woman. The woman in my fragmented memories, the one who sang to me, the one whose arms held me high at the top of a lighthouse in Maine. The real story, the one that had been buried for 25 years, was finally beginning to surface, and it was more terrifying and more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. Continue storia. The silence in the small room was absolute, broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart. My father's shoulders slumped, the fight gone out of him. He looked like a man who had been carrying a terrible weight for so long that its sudden removal left him unbalanced, hollow. Her? I finally managed to say, the word scraping past the tightness in my throat. Who is her? He didn't look at me, instead focusing on his own weathered hands, clasped tightly on the table. Your mother, he said, and the words were so soft I almost missed them. Then he corrected himself, his voice cracking. Your biological mother. The world tilted on its axis. The fluorescent hum of the lights seemed to grow deafening. Biological mother. The words were like two stones dropped into the still pond of my identity, sending ripples through everything I had ever believed. The woman sobbing in the courtroom, the woman who had raised me, who had made feijoada every Sunday, was not my mother. Isabella, my father, no, the man I had called my father, whispered. Her name was Isabella. A flood of sensations, memories I had labeled as dreams or imagination, crashed over me. The scent of jasmine and oil paint. A laugh that was like wind chimes. A lullaby in a language I didn't understand, sung in a soft, melodic voice. The feeling of being twirled around in a sunlit room until I was dizzy with joy. Isabella. What happened? My voice was a fragile thing. He took a deep, shuddering breath. I was her art professor. She was incandescent. So full of life, so talented. It was a cliché, I know. But we fell in love. It was a passionate, messy, impossible affair. I was married to Maria. We were trying to have a child, and it wasn't happening. It was a dark time. He ran a hand over his face. When Isabella told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I ended it. I gave her money, told her it was for the best. I was a coward. I could only stare at him, this stranger who was my biological father, as he unraveled the foundational lie of my life. She disappeared. I thought that was the end of it. Then, about 5 years later, a social worker contacted me. Isabella had been in an accident. A car crash. She didn't make it. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. She had named me as your father in her will. You were in the system. Maria and I, we were still childless. We saw it as a second chance. A blessing. We adopted you. We brought you home and we gave you our name. We decided it was better, cleaner, for you to never know. To be our daughter, completely. Cleaner for who? I asked, a cold fury beginning to thaw the shock. For you? So you wouldn't have to explain your affair? So you wouldn't have to look at me and be reminded of your betrayal? It was to protect you, he insisted, his voice rising with a desperate energy. And to protect our family. We were a family, Lena. We loved you. We raised you as our own. Maria is your mother in every way that counts. But she's not, I said, the truth of it settling deep in my bones. And you let me believe a lie my entire life. And when I started to sense it, when I started to remember pieces of her, you called me crazy. You had me locked away. The magnitude of their deception was staggering. The blog, you weren't just worried about me. You were terrified I would stumble onto the truth. He nodded, a slow, miserable gesture. Carlos found an old sketchbook of Isabella's in the attic. You'd been looking for art supplies. There were drawings of you as a baby, of the lighthouse, he was worried you'd find it. That's when he guessed your blog password and showed us what you were writing. You were getting so close, Lena. You were remembering things you shouldn't have been able to remember. We thought if you were in a controlled environment, with medication, those memories would fade. We thought we could fix it. Fix me, I said, the words dripping with bitterness. You thought you could medicate the truth out of me. The door opened and Eleanor Vance stepped back in, her expression grimly satisfied. The judge has recalled us. The petitioners have withdrawn their petition for guardianship. There was no victory in the announcement, only a vast, hollow emptiness. We walked back into the courtroom. My mother, Maria, was still weeping, but silently now, her body curled in on itself. Carlos would not meet my eyes. The legal proceedings were a blur. The judge spoke words about the importance of truth, the dismissal of the case, the restoration of my rights. The gavel fell. It was over. I was free. But freedom felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. The solid ground of my past had crumbled away beneath my feet. I walked out of the courthouse with Eleanor, the afternoon sun warm on my skin, the sounds of the city loud and jarring after the muffled silence of Oakhaven. My family, the Ribeiros, left through another door. There were no goodbyes. Eleanor handed me a manila envelope. This is everything I could gather on Isabella Silva. Birth certificate, her will, the adoption records. There's an address for a storage unit she rented. The key, your father gave it to me. I took the envelope, its weight feeling immense, the key inside a cold, metallic secret. The first few days of my new reality were spent in a haze. I returned to the house only to pack my things. The smell of Fajota was gone, replaced by the scent of dust and silence. I rented a small apartment, the first space that was truly, completely my own. I didn't paint. I just sat, holding the key, staring at the envelope. Finally, on a bright, clear morning, I drove across town to a rundown, industrial part of the city. The storage facility was a long, low building of corrugated metal, rows of identical orange doors stretching into the distance. I found Unit 117. My hand trembled as I inserted the key. The lock turned with a heavy, metallic clunk. I pulled up the rolling door. The air that wafted out was thick with the smell of dust, old paper, and the faint, ghostly scent of turpentine and jasmine. The unit was a time capsule. Canvases were stacked against the walls, their faces turned inward. Boxes were labeled in a flowing, elegant script. In the center of the space, covered by a white sheet, was an easel. My heart in my throat, I walked forward and gently pulled the sheet away. It was a painting. A portrait of a little girl with dark, curious eyes and a smattering of freckles across her nose. Me. I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by a chaos of colorful toys, and I was looking up at the artist with an expression of pure, unadulterated love. The style was bold, impressionistic, full of light and movement. It was the work of someone who saw the world in vibrant, emotional color. It was the work of my mother, Isabella. I spent hours in that unit, unearthing the life of the woman who had given me life. I found sketchbooks filled with drawings of me, sleeping, eating, playing. I found journals, pages filled with her thoughts, her dreams, her profound love for me. She wrote about her heartbreak, her struggle as a single mother, but also about her fierce, unwavering joy in being my mother. She never expressed bitterness toward my father, only a deep, abiding sadness. In one journal, tucked between pages filled with grocery lists and pediatrician appointments, I found a pressed flower and a photograph. The photograph was of the two of us at the top of the Portland headlight, the wind whipping our hair, both of us laughing. I was holding a small, stuffed elephant. I had a memory of that elephant. Its name was Barnaby. I sat down on the dusty concrete floor, the photograph in my hands, the scent of jasmine from the pressed flower filling my senses. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt a profound, aching loss for a woman I would never know, and an immense gratitude for the love she had given me in our 5 short years together. She had not abandoned me. She had loved me fiercely, until the very end. The Ribeiros had tried to bury her, to erase her from my story out of their own fear and shame. But in doing so, they had buried a part of me, too. Weeks later, I stood in my new studio, the morning light streaming through the large window. The portrait of me as a child, Isabella's masterpiece, stood on an easel in the center of the room. I picked up a brush, the weight of it familiar and comforting in my hand. I dipped it into a vibrant, cobalt blue and made the first stroke on a fresh, white canvas. I was not the girl at the Fajota table, living a lie. I was not the patient in the sterile room, being medicated into submission. I was not the plaintiff in a courtroom, fighting for my sanity. I was Lena Silva, daughter of Isabella, an artist, like my mother. And for the first time in my life, I was finally, completely, whole. The story they had tried to silence was now the very thing that would set me free. I painted, not to exorcise demons, but to invite a ghost, a beautiful, talented, loving ghost, back into my life. And with every stroke, I welcomed her home. História finalizada.